Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, what's going on, man?
Everything, but that's all right.
Good morning, BC.
Speaking of everything, I think we're right on top of this. Just in the last few minutes, it sounds like Larry Tarver, former Maryland commit, has officially flipped to Nebraska.
Yeah, kind of an expected flip, but we still are able to label it a flip, I think, by definition, and that's always fun on signing day to call those signing day flips. So, yeah, he had visited Nebraska in the fall, and it sounded kind of encouraging. And in the last week or so, it really picked up steam that there was a good chance Nebraska was going to get him. But, they continue to bulk up with some athletes and back end guys in that defense. I think Evan Cooper's really sort of he's up the competition in that room with some of these late additions we're going to see.
Yeah, BC, it seems like they've added about 1 million different guys in that defensive backfield over the last class or so. So the competition is going to be high for sure. What do you know about Larry Tarver just as a prospect? He's about a 5'11" corner out of Miami, Florida, as I mentioned previously, committed to Maryland.
Yeah, well, he's a great – these are all good athletes, but he's a great athlete down in that talent-rich area, as you mentioned, in Miami, where there's, even the guys who aren't the first people you notice at the camp because maybe their measurables aren't 6'2" or 6'3" at that corner spot or whatever, they're still freaks. And he's got a lot of talent. It should tell people something that Maryland was in on him because, whatever your thoughts are on Maryland's program, they've built it up nicely under Loxley, and they get a lot of dudes, who are really good at skill spots and in the defensive backfield. So the fact that was the other candidate here tells you something. Nice addition to just add to the competition, and I think Bly Hill is too, the portal corner they got out of St. Francis, PA. FCS school, so he still has 3 years to play, so it's not like he's just a one and done or anything like that. And as you think about Nebraska secondary next year, we've talked about it before. We love the safety spots with Buford and hopefully a healthy Deshaun Singleton and Gifford back at the Rover, but you got to replace Quentin Newsome. Hartzog had his ups and downs, if we're honest, and Tommy Hill was coming on late. But you're hoping you can find a 2 deep at that cornerback spot that you can really trust and can shut some people down, and so they've definitely attacked it.
Man, you have my brain going here, BC. I feel like 3 questions wrapped into one, but I'm gonna start short or start small here. The first one being on that Bly Hill edition. I've seen a little bit of his film. I don't know how much you've watched, but it seems like he could work on his first step a little bit, but he does have some good length, some good speed. And then a follow-up to that, as you look at that defensive back position, that group, we know that Caleb Benning signed over to Nebraska this morning as well. How quickly do you see a guy like Caleb finding his way onto the field? So if you could start with Hill, if you know anything about him, if not, totally fine. It's pretty new. It's pretty fresh, but we've seen Caleb play for the last 4 seasons and know what he can offer.
Well, Hill's dad, Leroy Hill, played in the NFL for the Seahawks and spent I think it was like 8 years in the league. So he's got really good genes. As you mentioned, he's got length. He's 6'3". There's not a ton of film on him, even huddle highlights, because he was kind of an under the radar guy out of Baltimore originally, but it probably tells you something that Nebraska handpicked him the way they did, and Evan Cooper really specializes in that. So you sort of have to trust his evaluation on it, and also the genes and all that. It seems like a good fit. We'll see. As far as Caleb, Caleb is just. Bo Pelini and coaches like to say he's a football player. They always say that, and you're like, yeah, I got that. But we know what that means. Caleb's just one of those guys you could roll it out and play in the parking lot on a Tuesday, and he'd perform and be one of the best guys. He just has a knack for making plays. So I never discount what he can get done and how quickly he can get it done. And obviously, knowing his dad and just the background he has of knowing the game, he's going to be a quick study, so you can't count him out. And I always think the secondary is a position where sometimes guys can emerge pretty fast as a freshman. Like Dwight Boodle, I think would have had a say more in things if he hadn't been injured this year. He was a guy they really liked, and he came on fast. So he's an example of how quickly it can sometimes come for a guy in the secondary.
BC, another, quote unquote flip that has happened this morning is Vincent Shavers. He had decommitted from Miami a couple days ago, was on campus with Rayola this past weekend. How big of a pickup is Vincent Shavers for Nebraska?
I love Shavers as a prospect. He's a guy, really great closeout speed. Just one of those Miami athletes again. This staff hit the Miami, Florida area hard in December. They were down there making sure they had their commitments sewn up with guys like Ja'Cory Barney and all that. But they were also looking, I think, knocking on the doors of some other guys. And Shavers is one of them that they've been interested in. They got him here for a weekend visit. He had been committed to Miami up until like the end of last week. Mm-hmm. I think it was just sort of a numbers game with Miami as to why that they parted ways. And we're seeing that at a lot of schools nowadays where they build up their class. I think we're seeing it at Nebraska a little bit, and then some guys just have to fall off at the end. But I don't think he's a lesser player by any means. And he comes in at a linebacker spot where Nebraska is going to need to bulk it up a bit. You're kind of entering that era post Henrich and Reimer where you've got to find some guys. It's great that John Bullock's coming back for sure, mm-hmm. but some young players are going to need to kind of get in the mix. And I think that's probably enticing the Shavers. I know they love the visit. I've talked a little with his dad and just how, football centric this place is, but also there had to be appeal like, hey, the door is open for you to come and try to, work your way on the 2D pretty fast here. And that could be pretty appealing, especially if you're a defender. He's like, I could maybe do that. And, oh, yeah, they were really good last year on that side of the ball. That's an exciting defense to play in. So I think Tony White's got a lot to sell right now.
BC, we had this question pop up on the show earlier, and unfortunately haven't gotten to it just yet. But I think, talking about it with you will be the perfect time. This question coming over from Heath in our 7 o'clock hour. We spoke a lot with Caleb and Carter Nelson before we really got into more signing day talk and asking them about their relationships with this coaching staff, and both of them brought up how Coach Rhule just was really a man of his word. And then Keith asked this question on the heels of Dylan Rayola saying in an interview that the thing he loves most about Coach Rhule is he connects with his players. Do you think that's more telling of Coach Rhule or more telling of the universities that passed on Dylan Rayola?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know on what else happened outside of our bubble. I do know, like with Georgia and Rhule and all that stuff, I don't know for sure. So I can't speak. I'd just be talking out of turn. I do know that persistence matters, and making someone feel wanted is going to win you guys like Rayola on days like today. It's also going to win you guys in this day and age a couple years down the road sometimes. Like, this is an era in college football where there's some guys who are signing elsewhere today, but if Rhule and this staff is as good at relationship building as I think they are, you never know what might come around if they need to plug in a guy from the portal here or there a year or two from now, because they already had a relationship from recruiting him in this cycle. And so all that stuff matters. And all I know with Dylan Rayola is that a year ago at this time, I thought Nebraska was dead in the water with him. And I thought the relationship had flown with the previous staff. I thought they'd butchered it. And it was Rhule and his staff that laid a foundation in that first month they were here, and they had all their assistant coaches go and visit them in January. No other staff had done that. Obviously, his uncle's a coach, so that means something. Can't play naive about it. But I think that first month on the job, we'd be remiss to not go back and say that Rhule and his staff sort of recalibrated the Rayola situation with Nebraska that gave them a chance in this final month to have happen what happened.
Well, BC, to be fair, we're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. That wasn't just your perception of the situation, right? Like, the previous staff did butcher that relationship. Like, that's not really a secret at this point, right? Like, that's the actual position they were in.
Well, yeah, I don't think it went well at the top with the head man, the last head man and the recruitment of him. But what's done is done, and there was time to get that one off the ground again, and this new staff did a good job with it. So yeah, I think Rhule definitely. Everybody's talked about the last month with Rayola, and for fair reason. There's probably a book to be written there if you knew everything. But the first month of it was with Rhule joining the Husker staff, and the way they got after that recruitment, I think is just as pivotal in how this turned out.
BC, speaking of Dylan Rayola and how things might turn out, how much do you think his impact could have on the 2025 class? I know he committed probably a little too late to have a huge impact on this year's class, but as you look forward, do you expect Nebraska to get a bump from the presence of Dylan Rayola in next year's class?
I think they will if he's part of it, maybe the starter plays a lot in 24 and it's just really looking good. Like, okay, they got their QB at Nebraska. Look how that offense is starting to hum a little bit. He throws the ball downfield. You might get some skill guys who say, I'll jump on board with that. This guy's got a few more years there. Let's ride. And no doubt that could have an impact. Now we got to see how it plays out, over the spring and fall with Dylan, because a year from now is a long time. I mean, if somehow something happens and someone else is starting or, wins the competition or whatever, I know that it seems like it's not going to happen to people right now, but I kind of want to wait to see how it plays out. Then maybe it's not going to mean as much with next year's class as far as the Dylan Rayola factor. So definitely something to keep in mind, though. And while I'm on the air, I want to bring up Danny Kalin because I was over at Bellevue West, and I just a great kid, and I appreciate on a day like this, that he's having his moment too, and he signed the papers and is not backing down from a challenge. And I was talking to a couple of his teammates, Isaiah McMorris and Davon Hall played with him, and they're like, that's just how he is. I mean, he's the kind of guy who lives for that fight, and he loves to compete and loves football, and so he's like, let's go. And so I like his mindset too as he goes into the competition, and he's enrolling early. So you never know how it's going to go, but obviously the Dylan Rayola thing has captured the imagination of some people, and nationally too. I've never seen nationwide Nebraska recruiting have a player focused on like we're seeing with Dylan Rayola.
Well, BC, you mentioned that mindset. I brought it up earlier on in the show of how, like, realistically, I think how DK should be thinking is, I'm going to develop over these next 2-3 years. Yes, I'm going to compete, but my focus should be on development. Do you think that it should be his mindset too, or do you have a different way of thinking when it comes to Danny Kalin at Nebraska?
I think you just go into it with the thought of, like, I love to always see how I stack up against the best guy. They say this is the best guy. And any competitor is probably thinking to himself deep down, I'd like to prove I'm the best guy. How long that's going to take, or if that takes a fall or 2 years or 3 years. I want to prove that. And, it's not always settled by recruiting rankings. Like sometimes guys are rated really high and someone else ends up being a better player at the next level. So that's always possible, and you got to leave that door open. But if I'm Daniel Kalin, yeah, I'm just going in there like, I want to be around the best. This guy is supposedly the best at his position, as they say. He's been around Dylan Rhule a lot. I mean, he's been around him at Elite 11 camps, and he was here at some Husker camps and stuff like that. So he's seen him. So that's not going to be new. And Daniel knows Chubba and Heinrich from his time, on campus pretty well, I think. So I think, and the good thing for Kalin is he's got such a great relationship with so many guys in this class. He's going to feel, like he's got some family around him when he gets down there, for how he's connected with guys. So I know where everybody thinks it's going to go and how it kind of has this map laid out. Okay, it's a few years of Rayola, a couple of years of Kalin. If you're a competitor, you probably view it a little bit differently, and I think we understand that too.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson of Husker 24/7. All right, we talked about Larry Tarver and his flip. We talked about Vincent Shavers and his flip. Guy that it wouldn't be a flip, but that you also is kind of projected to be in this class is Amari Sanders. Do you still feel good about Amari ending up with Nebraska today?
From what I know, yeah. He's been a popular crystal ball pick for Nebraska for a while. I think that one is going to go Nebraska's way. We'll see for sure. I think it's at 11 when that one goes down. But again, he's another DB. So, I mean, think about if that happens. You got him, you got Tarver, you got Bly Hill. I mean, those are 3 DB adds today to the class to go with, obviously, Caleb, and I'm leaving people out. But they got a good class of guys in the secondary, and that's why I think Evan Cooper, he has his fingerprints over every Husker class because he's so good at analyzing talent, and I think a lot of the other coaches look his way for that. But just look at his specific room. Pretty nice job. And it looks even a lot different by tonight than it did a week ago. So everybody who's in that room right now, there's going to be some new guys that are going to be hungry to try to take spots, and that's what you want to do. You want to just keep pushing people.
BC, I saw this update just about an hour ago, and we were talking a little bit about Ryan Wingo and how he hasn't signed yet. And an update from Chad Simmons on Twitter says schools like Missouri and Nebraska are working late to see if they can flip Wingo from Texas. Mizzou, being as they are the state school, probably has a better edge than Nebraska, but are you hearing anything on the Ryan Wingo front in connection to Nebraska?
I know Schaefer posted something on our board, and he'd been attacking this while I was up here at Bellevue West, and I think the belief is it's going to be difficult. So I think it's kind of a long shot, but it's not over till it's over. And then you asked about the Rayola effect. I mean, if there was one guy who, if Rayola had been committed to Nebraska since, say, May, where maybe you wonder if it would have been different, and I guess it still could be, it would be Wingo. He visited on that trip with all those big name guys, including Rayola in April or whatever it was. And we always looked at that weekend and said, is this going to be the weekend we always talk about? It didn't end up necessarily being that way, but I guess if Wingo somehow flipped, which I'm not saying, I think it's a long shot, but if that somehow happened, maybe we'll have to revisit that weekend and what it meant and the connection he had with Rhule and all that stuff. But I know there were people who the last few days have been asking, is there anybody who could flip dramatically on the last day? And he was the one name that sort of just floats out there. So until he signs with somebody, you keep your eye on it, and that's what we're going to do.
BC, we've got about 3 minutes left here with you. Who out of the guys we haven't talked about, So we talked about some of the flips in Tarver and Shavers. We've talked a lot about Dylan Rayola, talked about Danny Kalin. Outside of those guys that we've talked about, who is somebody in this class that you're really, really excited about?
I'm pretty pumped up about Peters on the O-line. I think he's going to be a pretty good player. I think Braylon Prude, the linebacker out of Texas, is an under the radar guy.
Mm-hmm.
Probably doesn't get enough buzz. I think Ja'Cory Barney, who's going to enroll early, wide receiver out of Miami. Some would say he's not underrated, but I don't think he gets talked about as much as other guys. He's got to bulk up a little bit, but I talked to him last week. He's come into his ideas. He's going to play in 24. That's like one of those kids who's just like, yeah, I'll be out there sort of deal. So Ja'Cory Barney could be an interesting one to follow, but you could do it with this class. It's interesting. There's like 12 to 15 guys you could pick out, and someone could say, oh, that's my under the radar guy. And you could make a convincing argument for, and it's kind of the way this staff recruits. Yes, there's the headliners like Rayola and all that, but they very much trust their own evaluations. Roger Gradney's a guy who he has some 4-star status, but he doesn't get a ton of buzz, and he's just a great athlete that could probably play either side of the ball if you wanted him to. So there's all sorts of guys like that. And then if you want someone who just like has proven it this year, Keelan Smith. I wrote about him last night, the player of the year in Missouri. I mean, Neil Smith's son. The year he had as a receiver / tight end was incredible, leading his team to its first state title. So Keelan Smith, as far as guys in this class who had the best senior year, I'd say he had as good as any.
BC, I'm going to try to rush this one in. Got about 30 seconds because I was thinking about this away from Dylan Rayola. Who presented the biggest recruiting battle in your eyes and ended up being the biggest recruiting win because of it?
Oh, man, that's going to be a hard one. And I'm trying to think.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I'm not going to come up with a good answer on the spot. So I hear the music, so I'll think about that for next week. But
my man, I'll save it.
All right, we'll save it. I like this class, and I like you guys having me on. I always appreciate it.
We appreciate you, BC.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. BC, thanks. We won't talk to you next week because we'll be gone, but we will have
you 2 weeks.
We'll have you back in a couple of weeks. Happy holidays, BC. We appreciate you.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
See you, man.
That's Brian Christopherson. Coming up next, Andy Kendi from KETV here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.